enterprise model that he based off of 7 Sons in Kentucky. And it's basically like you have different enterprise owners that work together underneath an umbrella that helps provide that financial security and those resources, those infrastructure resources. So now we can have young people come here that want to farm, but they can't afford a tractor and to buy land. And so they can use our tractors and use our land. And also importantly, they have that social infrastructure as well. So they have us to help them get through all their problems and support them. But then also when they take off, we back them up on their work. And I think one of the things that he talks about really well is kind of a little bit of the history of ag in Tennessee. So I think that's what he's going to talk about tonight. And then afterwards, I'm sure you can ask any of us questions. He'll be around, I'll be around. And anybody who hasn't gotten a coupon for the farm stand and wants to take home some of our meat, holler at me. And I also meant to give away, I have these No Farms, No Food bumper stickers, so if anybody wants one of those, grab me. But otherwise, here he is, Alex Miller.
Thanks, Wendy. Here comes Mo to help me out. So this is I keep thinking that train will eventually come to an end. This is I'm sort of on a one-person crusade to try to save family farms. And that's what this talk is an outlook of, this sort of thing. And there is never a better case of being accused of preaching to the choir than talking to you folks about this, because I know that you understand what family farms are all about, what permaculture is all about, and why we might want to save them. So maybe the way to listen to this is for ammunition and ideas that you can take the message forward and share it with other people. Not so much just for you, but for the folks you might talk to and meet. So with that said, let me get started. So we are a century family farm. That means that we're 100 years old. Our farm was started in 1919 by my grandfather. I'm the third George Alexander Miller. He bought it. He was the 4th generation of our family to be a farmer in East Tennessee. None of us had had enough money to buy any land. None of them had had enough money to buy any land. And in World War I, he scraped together a little bit of money, just enough to buy a worn-out hillside farm, a very badly eroded farm. Some of you know what that's like, right? And the neighbors did a couple of things. One is a neighbor brought him a load of hay and said, your cattle aren't going to make it through winter because you don't have any hay left. But another family called him into lunch, and Mrs. Baker was the matron of that family, and Mrs. Baker pulled him aside and said, young man, you'll never make a go of it on that farm. The land's too poor, it's too worn out, your kids will be starving to death, they'll be licking the skillet. He started calling it Lick Skillet Farm at that point, and he raised 10 kids on it. The one on your left is my father. He's George A. Miller, the second. He bought some land to move his new bride to that was just across the creek from the old family farm, and we've just kept doing that ever since. We just keep adding. So we've gone from 132 acres in the original purchase up to, I think we're just over 1,100 acres being farmed right now. I'm proud to say that the 9th generation is being raised on the farm. That's the little one there getting introduced to pigs, and that's generation 8 and 9 there. We don't expect them necessarily to farm our land, but we hope someone will. So that's what Wendy was talking about. Our vision is we want to find young people who are dedicated to agriculture but couldn't possibly afford to buy into it for reasons I'll explain in just a moment, and basically put them in business here, let them farm on our land, and then they pay themselves out of half of the gross earnings. We cover the overhead and all the fixed costs out of the other half of the earnings. If you know someone who wants to be part of a team and farm on the kind of farming that we do here, send them to me. We're always looking for good people. People is the #1 challenge of farming. People. It's not the animals, it's not the marketing, it's not the accounting, it's people. And we're always looking for good people. So send all those good people that you know about to talk to us. Today we have 4 different livestock species on the place: cattle, pork, beef, and lamb. Let's see, I left out chicken. You see what they are. I don't need to tell you what those animals are. If I don't tell you what those animals are, we'll start over. Our big thing is that we're grass-fed, and we try to, one of our family values that we farm by is we want to be good ancestors. We had good ancestors, and we want to be good ancestors of future generations. And for us, that means we need to be farming with regenerative agriculture, and that's a big push. So we raise all of our animals in a way that I don't think of us as being permaculture, but I think of us as being sympathetic to, and our version of what permaculture would be. We certainly want the agriculture here to be a permanent feature of this property, and that's kind of the way we raise it. I thought I'd give you a picture of what the farm looked like before we bought it, this farm. So the building that you're in right now, that's it. So those of you who bought some rough land and had to clean it up, we feel your pain. This was 15 years ago, and if you go back to Google Earth, you can find old pictures of your place. And this was well before we bought it, but it was a friggin' mess. There were 54 buildings in this little area right here associated with the dairy. 54 that had to be wrecked and torn down and all that sort of thing. And as far as the land is concerned, this is what the land looked like. So we know what it's like to buy worn out land as well. It's still part of what we do in farming. And that was part of the land that I talked about earlier. It took 3 years of cover crops to get that land to turn on and to actually be productive in some of the land that you visited this morning. All right, so into the talk proper. Why is this happening to local farms? Well, first of all, what's happening to local farms? So we did a study. When the farm turned 100 years old, we did a study of what was going on and what the next 100 years might look like. So here's some statistics for you in Tennessee. In 1919, when this farm was formed, there were 280,000 farms in Tennessee. By 2019, 100 years later, there were 66,000 farms. It's 114,000 farms that disappeared in a century. If you do the math, that works out to about one farm lost every 4 hours for 100 years. And if you look, the pressure on farmland in Tennessee is still continuing. In fact, Farmland Trust has identified Tennessee as the second most threatened state in the nation for loss of farmland. If you just look at the percentage of land that's being lost and the lack of policies to do anything about that, the combination of those two puts us right near the top. Texas is the only one ahead of us, and I don't care what happens in Texas. This is what's happening to, I'm sorry. That's what's happening to a lot of our farmlands. A lot of my neighbors complain about this. I don't. There's a tremendous influx of wealth into Tennessee. People that are buying up farms and turning them into little farmettes like this, they're going to be a fantastic resource for us if we can get out to them and say, look, if you want farms to be preserved, if one of the reasons you moved here was for farmland, then you need to engage in saving those farms. Because these folks have the money to pay for the kind of products that we can raise. Just to put it in perspective, we don't sell anything that's cheap. Right? We don't make a particularly great margin on any of our products, but in order to make the margin we do, we sell at outrageously expensive prices. And that's just what it takes if you want to farm at the scale that we are and the way that we are. It's not going to be competitive with farming at the scale that Costco is doing with chickens. They will sell, what is it, this year 117 million chickens that they raise themselves. Nobody's going to compete with that. So Costco has $4, they'll sell you a ready-to-take-home rotisserie chicken for $4.99. We have that much money up in our broiler chickens. We have that much money tied up in our broiler chickens by the time they first go out on pasture. It's just a totally different business model. And if folks like this won't support us, farms will go away. It's as simple as that. There's nothing that will save us. Farms will go away because we can't afford to compete on cost. It has to be on something that customers are willing to pay for. All right, so why do local farms matter? This is the version of the talk, excuse me. This is the version of the talk I just gave at the, what's this thing called again? Weston A. Price Foundation. Anybody know Weston A. Price? All right, so they're all into healthy eating, that sort of thing. So there's some of the slides in there just for them, and I thought just go ahead and use those slides here. So they have a big program on that's trying to get all their members to buy 50% of their food from local suppliers, and that's what this is about. So they're clearly seeing this important. My question is, so why is it important? My day job is I'm a business school professor, and if you want to talk about these sorts of things, I'm happy to talk about it, but I don't think anybody's really interested in it. But so we're going to skip over that, but punchline is Agriculture in Tennessee is worth around $81 billion by the time you look at all the multiplier factors and those sorts of things. So it's a big business in Tennessee. Most of it's big ag though. Here's what I think really matters. Food safety, the price people were real interested in that. Food security, quality, animal welfare, and then the environmental impact. So I'm going to hit those 5 points. Food safety, there's 2 things that we can talk about that the Warren A. Price folks were really interested in. One is the amount of vaccines that they were consuming through their meat. They're not big on vaccines. And the other is the amount of antibiotics being consumed through their meat. So we'll talk about both of those. Those actually take place at 2 different times, and we're going to focus on beef here. It happens at 2 different times in the life of the animal. The vaccines typically happen when the animal is on the farm. So before we moved to what we're doing now, we were a pretty standard commercial cow-calf operation. We finished out our cattle in a CAFO out in Nebraska. We retained ownership through those CAFOs until the animals went to the feedlot. And we did things just the way UT's ag extension folks would say to do it. Did it all by the books. And we gave a lot of vaccines. In today's dollars, we probably gave $60 worth of vaccine to every animal that was on the place. Today we do almost none of that. I think that the vaccines are an excuse for poor animal husbandry very often. And I think that if this is your idea of animal husbandry, you're going to have to depend upon science and medicine to get you through it. So I think once you move away from that, you suddenly have much less need for vaccines. This year we will spend about $1.75 on vaccines. We're still giving vaccines primarily for pink eye. We have not yet conquered pink eye, but when we get a better handle on pink eye, we're ready to stop vaccinating for that as well. But that's the big one right now. So this is industrial ag. I'm going to be critical of industrial ag. A lot of folks say, well, you shouldn't criticize anybody that's trying to feed folks. I'm not so sure that industrial ag is really trying to feed anybody, and I'm going to be critical of them. I'll just be straight up with you. So the question, this is from Farm Progress, very forward-looking agricultural magazine, and the question was, how often should I vaccinate? The answer was, well, for heifers, all right, so that's a female that has yet to have a calf, that's a heifer. They say the biggest thing is get her vaccinated 2 to 3 times in her first year. So vaccinate that calf as soon as she comes off the mama's milk at the Clostridium at 2 to 3 months. And then around weaning, vaccinate her again, and then 6 to 8 weeks before breeding. So she's going to be vaccinated 3 times before she's ever bred the first time. So then she moves into the mature cow herd. As a mature cow herd, I like vaccinating the mature herd twice a year. What? Twice a year? That's. But the logic is because the vaccines only last for 6 months. This is just wrong. The idea of pumping this much vaccine into animals just seems really backwards. But when we were, when we were doing the commercial thing, that's exactly what we did. We participated in a program called VAX 45. It's a nationwide program. You guys had it in North Carolina, right? You had something like VAX 45 for your cattle?
I don't know.
Okay, so for cattle, you want to wean your calves for 45 days before they're sold, and then you want to vaccinate them. And you're going to vaccinate them with 2 doses of a 5-way respiratory, 2 doses of at least a 7-way Clostridia, and then vaccinate for Pasteurella as well. And then they like for you to put them on feed, and they like for the feed to have I won't say it right, a micro antibiotic in every bite of feed that they take. If you look at who are the benefits of all this, pretty straight up. Benefits of it are the industry. All right, calves gain weight if they are pumped full of this stuff. And there's nothing in the statement of benefits. I just happen to be picking on the one from Oklahoma State because they have something of a leader in this area of the VAC 45 program. There's not one sentence in there anywhere that says, and this is good for people. All right, it's just not there at all. But if you do that, participate in that program, there are the 13 different vaccines that you're going to give. 13 vaccines that you're going to give. This is before the animal ever leaves your farm and goes to the feedlot. All right, once they go to the feedlot, the big issue is not vaccines, It's antibiotics. Is that dog being a nuisance?
Yeah.
Mo,
Turn into compost bucket.
oh, she'll eat everything.
Thank you.
Lie down. Lie down. Now stay. Stay. So when she gets up, you all tell me, because I won't. So when they go to the feedlot, the big thing is vaccines. Not vaccines, just antibiotics. So here's the reason that we would participate in that VAC 45 program. All right, if they just sell a weaned calf, when this data was collected, that calf is bringing in $147 per hundredweight, so $1.47 a pound, live weight. If you wean it, it brings $1.56. If you then pump it full of those vaccines, it'll bring another, what is that, 2 cents and 1 cent? Yeah, about another cent, cent and 30 cents, $1.30 per pound. If you go on and then precondition it, you'll get $1.58. In other words, we're talking about very small increases in the amount of money you're going to get for this animal. And we're pumping them full of that just for that very small gain. Now, granted, these calves would weigh 700 pounds, so the numbers would be, I mean, $7 maybe would be the difference between one category and the next. All right, now we're going to talk about antibiotics at the feedlot. So this busy chart, there's one number that I want you to pay attention to, and it's the one that's circled. That number says that of all antibiotics consumed in the United States, 82% of them are fed to animals, or consumed by, or used on animals, 82%. So we think that there's a problem with overuse of antibiotics. Most people think that means people are getting too many antibiotics. No, the issue is that animals are getting too many antibiotics, and then it's being transmitted to us through the feed. So the real problem with antibiotics and the antibiotic resistance is what's happening in the feedlots. When we would ship cattle out west, here's what would happen. They would immediately be given a broad spectrum, long-lasting antibiotic. As they were coming off the truck, they didn't know what had happened to them. They didn't know how these animals had been treated. Everything. 50,000 animals a year through this one little feedlot. Every single one of them. First thing you're going to do is get a long-lasting, broad spectrum antibiotic. Then they're going to be put on feed. That feed is going to have antibiotics in every single bite. And there's a reason for that. When you change the diet and give a ruminant a grain-based diet, it increases the acidity in their gut to the point that it starts leaking through the gut wall. So you change the acidity of their gut from 7, the same as water, to 5.2, the same as strong coffee. And that's a big enough difference that it leaches through their gut wall and then gets filtered out of the blood in the liver. That's a liver on the right of an animal that had 5.2 acute acidosis. Don't ask me to present whatever it is I'm trying to say. So yeah, you know what I'm saying. All those white, I know it's soon after dinner, but that's pockets of pus. And that's why that animal has to be left on antibiotics. Even on antibiotics, with every single bite, that animal can expect to live about 200 days. That's the reason when you take animals to a CAFO, they have to rush to get them finished in less than 200 days because their finishing is also killing that animal. The fattening is killing that animal because of its diet. So to keep it alive, we say, well, we're going to pump it full of antibiotics. Of course, the alternative is just don't put it in a CAFO. But that's a different issue. This is a place where the United States can justifiably call itself a global leader. I'm not so sure that that's something we want to be. But when it comes to use of antibiotics, there's nothing like the United States. We're way just orders of magnitude, 3 to 6 times ahead of what other folks are doing. This is very much a U.S. problem.
Are the other countries catching up to us, or are they going the other direction?
It varies. Some are going down. So, for example, I don't have a chart here, but if there are some very forward, Scandinavian countries, the one you would think, Netherlands, the UK, they're tightening up and limiting what you can do. You might think, well, I'll just be careful on where I buy my beef. If you're buying beef from a grocery store, you can't be careful enough. So look at this chart. there's the number, the one that circles one I want you to see. The animals coming through large feedlots in the United States, 99.5% of them have been given antibiotics while they were there. You just can't avoid it. The only way to avoid this treatment of animals is to avoid industrial agriculture. You have to find somebody that's producing meat differently than this model. Why is it we're doing all this? What's the return? The return of all this is if you can avoid this problem, you get an average daily gain of an additional average daily gain of about 5%. Now, an animal in a feedlot is designed to gain between 3 and 4 pounds a day. All right? So what we're talking about is 5% additional on top of that. But in order to get that additional 5%, all right, so they're going to be there for 200 days. If you reduced it by 5%, how many more days? Reduced efficiency by 5%, how many more days would they be there? You're talking about another 10 days. But in order to avoid feeding that animal for another 10 days, this is what we do to them. When it comes to money versus safety in industrial agriculture, there's no decision about where you're going to spend your money. You're going to pay attention to the money. The return on investment from all these antibiotics and vaccines works out to about $20 per head. This is on an animal that the beef will retail for somewhere around $5,000. So $20 saved on a product that's going to sell retail out for about $5,000. I like the cartoon on the right, doesn't have anything to do with agriculture. It says, not enough money's being spent on safety, so you need to be careful. Nothing that I need to change, you need to be careful. And I think that's exactly right. One last one on this. One last question. Is any of this helping the animals? I might be willing to support it as actually helping the animals, but here's data for the last 20 years that says the death rate in feedlots has actually gone up, almost doubled. Almost doubled in the last 20 years as we've spent more and more money on we're just losing the race. The microbes are smarter than, the diseases are smarter than we are. We're always going to lose to it. Okay, what about mRNAs? Anybody here care about mRNAs? Anybody know about it? All right, so there's been, in the Western Aid price thing, this is the big fear. All I can tell you right now is that there are no mRNAs that are approved for anything other than pigs, I think, currently. And there are mRNAs being given to pigs. We don't use any of those. I don't think we're vaccinating our pigs for anything, let alone vaccinating with mRNAs. There are no currently available mRNAs for cattle, but they are under research. So if you're concerned about this, this is something to pay attention to. My big takeaway from it is that if you're concerned about mRNAs, you ought to be able to find out whether or not your animal has been subjected to mRNAs. I don't care if you're for it or against it, but you ought to know. And right now, there is no way for you to know how your animal was treated. Your best chance of knowing how an animal was treated is buy from someone you trust and go and ask them questions about how did you raise this animal, what did you do to it. And that's I don't know any other way to do it. There's no labeling on there that's going to tell you much of anything. All right, let's move on to food security. Everybody knows what this picture of. This is COVID. This is what happened. So we should be embarrassed as a nation. COVID hit and we couldn't feed ourselves. That's ridiculous. But it's even worse than that. You might not know this, but when COVID hit, see the blue line? That's the prices price change that happens in the first few weeks of COVID. Went up as the bubble hit, as the bubble burst, really. Then the wholesalers, the packers started raising their prices to the wholesalers and Kroger and those sorts of folks. And went up 67%. While their price was going up 67%, the price they paid for cattle went down 24%. This is a sign of a seriously broken market. We do not have a good, efficient market in agriculture right now. And anyone that has the ability to do this, nobody's ever going to say, yep, the system's working the way it's supposed to. What are you doing? Lie back down. Do it. This is what we did when COVID hit. This is Shannon and my oldest son, Brandon, who wasn't here today. They were packing up COVID care packages and selling them at a discount to our neighbors because we knew the shelves were empty and people wanted to buy meat, so that's what we did. This is another one of our values. We want to be good neighbors. Remember when we got started, we had neighbors that brought us hay. This is our payback. That's that social capital thing that we talk about building. Big punchline of this is that you need to be participating in food networks, not global supply chains. So if you're part of a global supply chain, let's just think of that metaphor, a chain. One link breaks in a chain and the whole thing falls apart. Now think about a network. Think about a net. You've got a fishing net and you've got a tear in it. So what? Still largely works. We need to be building food networks, not supply chains. And the way to do that is to get in contact with your local folks. I do a podcast for farmers on marketing meat to direct to consumers. And we had after COVID, we had a restaurateur, a chef, who said that during COVID, every single institutional sales agency failed him in COVID. And he never had a single local farmer that ever failed him. They always worked with him and found out something, so they always had meat to sell to his customers. But the Cisco's and all those folks invariably failed him. That's the difference between a global supply chain and a local food network. Let's talk about food quality. So this is a food quality test of our eggs. This sort of thing you guys might do at home. Up in the left-hand side is our eggs, and then we got local competition, factory farms, and leading organic. Basically, we want to make sure that we're producing the kind of food customers want. This is an example of it. Here's something that's a little bit different. Anybody know what we're doing in that picture? We're ultrasounding that steer. That's the steer that we're finishing, and we ultrasound all our steers. We don't ultrasound them to see if they're pregnant. We ultrasound them to see how much intermuscular fat they have. And then we take the ones that have the most fat and we sell to our customers. The ones that have less fat, they go to Farmers United and end up at Whole Foods. So we're happy that Whole Foods gets them, but we're even more happy that to kill, to consume. And I think that you're absolutely right in paying attention to that. And are you comfortable doing this? We did it for years. We did it for years, but here's our cattle on Lick Skillet today doing the same thing. These are calves being fattened on Lick Skillet. This is chickens. Everybody knows how bad it is for chickens. These are layers. So the layers will spend their entire life in those crates, will never be outside their entire life. They have one conveyor belt that brings in feed, another conveyor belt takes out eggs. It'll never move from a pen. It's probably got 9 birds in a pen about this big, a little cage about that big, that they'll spend their life in. Broilers, so chicken meat, this is what they look like, 60,000 birds. This is what was taking place over there in those barns before, 60,000 birds. Those are Cornish crosses. They're bred to gain weight so quickly that their muscle outweighs what their skeletons can support. And by the time they're ready to be harvested, which is at 6 weeks, from the time they hatch to the time they're ready to be killed is 6 weeks, they gain a pound a week. And they literally can't stand up. Their bones won't allow them to stand up. Lick skillet birds. Industrial lambs. Lick skillet lambs. You get the picture here. Let me rush on to this one, the pigs. So I love pigs. Who here raises pigs? Anybody got pigs? So pigs, most intelligent farm animal we have. There's intelligent as a border collie, which means they're as intelligent as a 2-year-old child. Now think about that. You're raising sentient beings with the intelligence of a 2-year-old child. How are you going to raise them? Industrial ag does it this way. Those are sows. They're held in isolation. They're bred and put in those pens so they can't injure each other until they're ready to deliver. When they're ready to deliver, they're laid over on their side so they can't ever get up. Because if they ever get up, they might lie down, and if they lie down, they might crush their little ones. Nature expects sows to crush their little ones. That's the reason sows give birth to 14, because they expect some of them are not going to make it because they're crushing. But for money's sake, we don't want any crushed. So that sow will be there. Fortunately for the sow, it's not that long, because they only get to nurse for 5 days before they're weaned. At 5 days, they're pulled off the sow. The sow's given a shot to bring her back into cycling, and in 21 days she'll be bred again or she'll be killed. The little one that's pulled off from her will eventually end up here. Look in the eyes of that animal and tell me there's not something behind them. I think people need to be aware of when you're eating industrial raised meat, pork in particular, that's what you're part of. If pigs have the intelligence of a 2-year-old, maybe they need to be raised like 2-year-old children. Here's an example of what that looks like. These are 2 sows that we rescued from an industrial operation. When we brought them in on the trailer, we put them out. This is the barn up here that we were in earlier today. When we tried to unload them, they wouldn't unload because we had bedding on the concrete. They'd never seen anything but bare concrete. Then when they was finally time for them to come outdoors, they wouldn't come outdoors because they'd never been outdoors. There were 2 sisters, and they did everything together. They were bred on the same day, birthed on the same day, and here they are bringing their little ones out on the same day. The pigs didn't care if it was mama or the aunt. They would just want to find a hole somewhere. And you see the little runt there running around looking for a hole to get in on. They did everything together. And it was just such a joy to see these pigs get to live like that and express their pigness, as Joel Salatin would say, as opposed to what you saw in the previous pictures. So again, if you're raising 2-year-old kids, what should it look like for a 2-year-old? It should look like that. And that's what pigs need to be doing. So again, just as Bruce and I were talking about, there's this moral responsibility that comes with raising animals. We think there's a moral responsibility that comes with eating animals as well. So just be aware when you buy industrial produced food, an animal had to go through this to get there. Quickly talk about the environment, environmental impact. I'm going to stick with cattle again because cattle right now get the most of the criticism about the environmental impact of farming. If you raise animals like this, that is, you're feeding them corn and soy, producing them that way, and you're moving them all across the country in trucks that look that way, and you're putting them in cavos that look that way, it is a friggin' environmental disaster. But who's to say that that's the way that animals need to be raised? There's actually some good scientific research that says, well, if you don't raise them that way, animals can actually be good for the environment. And part of permaculture is integrating animals into growing of plants. The same thing goes on here. We follow 5 principles of soil health, and one of them is integrate livestock. And cattle are a huge part of being able to build organic content in your land. So it's all in the way it gets raised. There's nothing wrong with cattle. There's just wrong ways and right ways of raising cattle. A lot of people say, yeah, but we got to have this industrial agriculture to feed the world. Is that true? No. So here's a couple of, everybody's got their own statistics on this, but here's mine. How much of the food raised by industrial agriculture actually gets eaten by humans? For corn, it's 10%. For soy, it's 6%. What does all that corn and soy get used for? It gets used as an alternative to petroleum, for the most part. We distill it. We turn it into chemicals. And it's not being eaten. We don't need it. In fact, there's lots of research that would say it's just the opposite. One of the consequences of industrial agriculture is, of course, just the runoff associated with it. So here's a map of the runoff throughout the Midwest. We talk about watersheds. Here's the implications of watershed. So all the pesticides, herbicides, and nitrates are running off, coming out into the Gulf at New Orleans, and the dead zone now is the size of Massachusetts. It's a part of what was a vibrant Gulf is now just as dead as it could be, just because it was cheaper to raise animals that way. And you got to ask yourself, so big acts the only way to feed the world? Well, then why are big and people going to go hungry today? It's really not working. You can't say, yeah, we got to do this to feed the world. The fact is, it's not working. We really have a skewed picture of this whole discussion based on what happened in the United States, because the United States has so much industrial agriculture. But it's 70% of the world's population, 70% of the world's population is fed like this. Small local farms, very much in keeping with what we call permaculture. The UN basically said this is what's going to feed the world. And so we're big believers in regenerative. We don't have anything at all that looks like a homestead. When Ben first came to us and talked about it, we said, we don't know anything about homesteads or permaculture. That's not what we do. But we are very much into regenerative agriculture. My definition of regenerative agriculture is we want this land to be as fertile as it ever was, which means 200 years ago kind of fertile, which means we had to regenerate what was there. And so we're committed to that. A little bit of shameless bragging here. We just got the Governor's Award for Environmental Stewardship for the last 5 years' work we've done. Thank you, Governor. For the work we've done in regenerative agriculture, and really excited about the fact that, for one thing, the state government's paying attention. That was really encouraging. The bottom line is the UN says the only way we're really going to feed the world is through small farms practicing what you folks would call permaculture. Just as simple as that. That's what's going to take. All right, so why is it happening to our local farms? Here's where the business school professor in me is going to come out. Is the economy stupid?
All right.
So let's look at the economics. So 1919, when my grandfather bought the land, he paid $50 an acre for it in 1919 prices. And he was selling cattle. That was his number one product at that point. 8.7 cents a pound. Okay? You with me? Now that's 1919 numbers. That's not very useful. So through the magic of economics, let's update those and get them in today's prices. 2019 prices, he paid $852 for the land, and the cattle were selling for $1.48. All right. Now let's look at what land was actually selling for in 2019 and what cattle were selling for. Land is selling for $12,500 if you can find it. Cattle prices were $1.50. What's that mean? That means our single biggest cost of doing business is up 1,470%, or our single biggest source of income is up 1%. Understand why it's economics? You can't make a living like this. My grandfather paid off the farm in about 5 years. If we bought land today and tried to farm it using industrial agriculture, we would never pay for it. We would fall behind every single year. If you go look at the predictions of UT, right now they're saying that a cow-calf operation that is selling into commercial channels in its very best years, might break even. The norm is to expect to lose money every single year. Now here's the punchline. They don't include the cost of the land in their calculations. And the land's the most expensive. They say, the land, it'll improve in its value and you'll sell it someday. Why is land cost going up? So let's talk about what's happened to land. Who's the biggest farmer in the United States? If you define farmers as people who own farmland, Bill Gates is the biggest farmer by far. I don't think he's doing a lot of farming. Why is he buying up farmland?
Control.
Well, control of what?
The people.
I don't think so. I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I think he's doing it because he's run out of other investment opportunities. It's a really good investment. Very low risk, steady appreciation, and it also often comes with water rights. So if you'd said control of the water rights, I'd say, you got it. I think he doesn't need to control. Why would he want to control us? We're already automatons buying all his products. Yeah, you got one.
I got a quick comment. I just got back from the UK. The drummer from Queen, he's doing the same thing as Bill Gates. Does the drummer from Queen have some social reason that he wants to control us, or does he just want a good investment? I think it's just a solid investment when you have that much money.
Yeah, we could argue about that another time. Here's another little bit of economics for you. In economics, the economics works when you have lots of buyers and lots of sellers. It doesn't work when you have very few of either one of those. So we've got lots of buyers of agricultural goods. We all do. We've got very few sellers. So the rule of thumb is anytime you have the largest 4 firms in an industry controlling more than 40% of sales in that industry, you no longer have a competitive marketplace because they'll collude and set prices and they just have too much power. So here's the market share held by the big 4 producers in all these different agricultural products. Beef is the most consolidated. 84% of all beef in the United States comes through just 4 different companies. And only 2 of those companies are U.S., 2 of them are Brazil. So we have simply given away control of our food industry to these giant corporations. And you saw what, it was because of that much control that when COVID hit, they can raise their prices 67%, while what they're paying was down 24%. This is a seriously broken system. Another piece of the competition is global competition. When you buy grass-fed beef, do you assume it comes from the United States? Do you assume it's local? No reason that you should. The bulk of it, if you buy it from commercial places like Butcher Box, it's coming from New Zealand. But there's a loophole in the law that says it can be sold as American grass-fed beef. As long as that product was inspected by USDA, it will be labeled American grass-fed. Not that it was produced here, but it was inspected here. This is what an inspection looks like. You get a frozen sea container, somebody opens the door and they look at the record and says, yep, it stayed frozen the whole way, close the door, inspected. And there is nothing on the label anywhere. We do not have country of origin label that will tell you where your meat was produced. It makes it really difficult for U.S. farmers to compete because New Zealand's got some tremendous opportunities to raise beef in particular, beef and lamb.
Do we know that they're actually at least grass-fed?
Yes, they should be able to say on their grass-fed, but even that's, again, I'm going to go back to what I said before. I know for a fact that there are cattle sold every week of the year within 20 miles of here that are sold as grass-fed, that are in fact raised on corn. So really the only way for you to know what you're getting is to look a farmer in the eye and say, show me your animals. Go up here to our barn and see what's in our feed. Hold it in your hand and say, tell me what's in this feed. And we'll tell you exactly what's in. It's actually written on the side of the barn. And then when you go with the animals, say, when was the last time these cattle were given feed? For our cattle, it was 22 generations ago. But if you can't have that eye-to-eye conversation, you don't really know. Dave, you going to say?
Yeah, I just can't believe all this transportation and all this extra steps is more economical.
It is. It is. So when we were producing animals and finishing them out in Nebraska, for us to feed our neighbors, our animals had to travel about 2,000 miles. About 1,000 miles out there and about 1,000 miles back, plus some change just moving around here. And that was the most cost-effective way for us to give you meat, just because of the economies of scale. We were, trucking's really cheap. It's all subsidized. Nobody's really charging the true cost of fuel.
Okay, that's it. I mean,
Yeah.
If you were to have a level playing field.
Oh, if you had a level playing field and everything carried its true cost. If we charged the true cost of this being incurred for running diesel trucks up and down the road, how much would diesel fuel cost? About $47 a gallon. It costs 1/10 that. So that's where your economies have come from, is that we're not paying attention to the real cost. I mean, I'm not into this camp, but a lot of people would say the reason we have all the autism today is because of the way we're treating our animals and all the drugs we're pumping into our animals. Again, I'm not going to go there, but that would be another example of a cost that's not being measured.
I have a question about like labeling and kind of twisted terminology. Is there a difference between grass-fed and pasture-raised?
Yeah, it's terribly confusing. It's terribly confusing. So I doubt if there has ever been a bovine, that's cattle, sold that was not grass-fed. Think about it. How could you possibly raise a calf that you didn't feed some grass to? What are they going to eat? So everything's grass-fed. If you really want to, the technical term today we have is it's grass-finished. And you need to hear the words 100% grass-finished. Really what you need to do is look a farmer in the eye and says, has this animal ever tasted grain? And if the answer is no, then say, that's what I want to know. Because all that other is just gibberish, just like free-range chickens. What's the definition of a free-range chicken? It has access to the outdoors. Sometimes. It's never going to go outdoors. Why would it go outdoors? There's no food out there. There's no water out there. You think a chicken's ever going to go outdoors if that's what it's going to face? But if there's a door that will allow it to go outside, that's a free-range bird. You cannot pay attention to the labeling. It's just meaningless. All right, put all those economics together, and here's why you can't farm the way farming is often. You can't do what we're doing in an industrial model. Of the dollar that gets spent on food in the United States, how much of it actually comes back to the farmer that produced the food? And the answer is 7.8 cents out of every dollar. Everything else is all the middlemen downstream. That's why when we looked at this and said, well, we'd like for the farm to survive, we immediately said, well, then we got to go direct to consumers. We have to take over all this ourselves because that's where all the money is. Nobody's getting paid to produce the food. Understand now the importance of the consumer in all this? You think that I'm going to be able to survive? If I doubled it, if I went from 7, 8 to 15%, could I survive getting 15% of the food dollars? No. The only way farms will survive is consumers go to farmers and buy direct. All right, this is what happens when you don't do that. So three key steps to saving local farms, wrapping this thing up. First of all, take the pledge, and this was again for the Price folks, the West Name Price folks. Their pledge is that you need to buy 50% of all your food locally. So take the pledge, find a local farm, and then carefully select your farmer. Let's talk about each of those. So if you want to know about the pledge, it's a very well-structured program with Western A Price. But it's easy enough to say, I want to spend 50% of my food dollar locally. That's basically what you're saying. Why is this important? Well, Jane Goodall, in her, when she stopped her anthropological work with gorillas, said she wanted to write one more book. She's actually written 2 since then, but she wanted to write one more book, and she wanted to do a lot of research and find the one thing that people could do that would have the biggest impact on the world as a whole. Economic justice, social justice, food distribution, environmental impacts, you name it. Global warming, everything. She looked at it all and said, if there's one thing you could do, what's it going to be? And you think it was drive a Prius? You think it was recycle? You think it was vote for any particular party? It was eat local. It has a profound impact on societies, economies, everything. And that was her conclusion, is eat local. So if you decide you wanted to eat local, how are you going to do it? Well, there's never been an easier time to find local sources of food. We're actually spending a lot of money on that. If you're a member of the Price Foundation, they have local chapters that have already done all the work for you. Even if you're not a member, if you just want to find out where you can get locally produced food, if you can't produce everything you need for yourself, or if you got neighbors that are looking for locally produced food and you can't provide it to them, tell them to look up Western A Price and they'll list it. Another is they also have an annual shopper's guide. So in there they have the good, the bad, the ugly of local food sources, and they'll let you know what you ought to be eating there. You can also look at their advertising. I used to be on the board of directors of a nonprofit out in Portland called the Good Meat Project. They also have a list of, just for meat. Western A Price will do all kinds of foods. But Good Meat Project is just meat, but they'll tell you folks that are producing good meat, not just tasty, but good in the broad sense. And then finally, in Tennessee and in virtually every state, contact the State Department of Agriculture. They'll have a website. You type in your zip code, and it'll tell you, here's all the local farms within your zip code. Here's all the local farmers markets. Here's the contact information for both. So if you want to go visit a farm, here's the number you call. It's just really simple. No one has an excuse. So all your friends that are coming to you and saying, I'd love to buy local, but just don't know how, and it's too much trouble. There is no excuse. We've made it really easy. So for example, well, more on that. This is the Tennessee program, Pick Tennessee. When you go visit the farm, I think this is a really important step. You need to have a heart-to-heart talk with the farmer before you pick your farmer. And here are the 8 questions. I studied on this for a while, and here are the 8 questions I came up with that I think are fair to ask any farmer. If any farmer takes exception to you asking these questions, leave. They've got something they're trying to hide from you. But I see no reason that you shouldn't be able to ask any of these questions. The first 5 deal with the health, safety, and quality of the food. The last 3 deal with the impact of the way the food is raised on the animals, the people, and the environment. I think all these are legitimate questions. And at least for me and my values, there's particular answers I want for each of those questions. You may have different questions and different values, but the bottom line is the same. You need to be talking directly to a farmer. If you talk to us, we're going to tell you, you're always welcome to visit our farm. You're always welcome to see the way we produce our animals, and we'll have a conversation with you. We're also going to say, we're going to make it as easy as possible for you to buy what we think is the best food that we can produce. You may disagree with us, but that's our goal, is produce the best food that we can produce. And to make it easy, this is a recent change, and I think it's going to surprise a lot of people. I believe that today the greenest way to shop for food is to shop local and have it delivered to your doorstep. This is another unexpected consequence of COVID. As a result of COVID, we now have seen an explosion of home delivery services. There will be very few days of the week that there's not a UPS or a FedEx truck coming near your house. We won't go, it's odd for us to go 2 days without getting a delivery here to the farm. If that truck is already coming to your house, then why are you driving out to go shopping? Why aren't you getting the food delivered to you on that truck? It's already going to be there. So the model that we're trying to go to is we want more and more people shopping online and having us deliver their food directly to their doorstep. That makes it very convenient. So it's easy to find folks who will provide you these sorts of products, and it's easy to be provided. You just wait at home, come home, the box is waiting on your doorstep, everything's still frozen, unpack it, put it in the freezer, and you're good to go. Most farmers like us that are doing what we're doing, selling direct to consumers, will do exactly what we're doing. We'll sell it to you by the piece. Right now, will become an industrial park. It's just as clear as it'll be. We got a railroad siding right there, we got a highway right here, and we're close to 2 interstates, 3 interstates. This will be an industrial park someday if it's not a farm. And what will make it a farm is when consumers decide they want it to be a farm. So that's my message. Questions or anything for me? Any questions? We're ready to go home? Yeah.